Thanks to everyone for being here today on this op-ed or not training. It has been really well received so far. We're so excited to be presenting for you. We'll do intros in just a moment, but in the meantime, please do introduce yourself in the chat, name, pronouns, location, title, org, whatever you feel like sharing, and also what you hope to get out of today's training. Would love to hear a little bit about that from you all as well. So here's a little bit about today's flow, just so that you can know what to expect. We did reserve an hour-and-a-half time period, but that was so that we could leave plenty of time for Q&A. We do plan on going through the full content within the first hour. So if you have to jump at the hour mark, feel free to, it's totally fine. This is being recorded and we will be sharing it. So, you know, if you have to jump, we realize everyone has busy lives and it'll be fine. Today's flow, welcome and intros. We'll get to that in just a moment. 2020 sucked, how that impacted media pitching, a little bit about gatekeeping, including a micro analysis of a couple of op-ed, some op-eds that Sarah looked at, when and why you should or shouldn't pursue an op-ed, and then what are the alternatives. So let us jump into it. I unfortunately cannot access the polling right now. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So we want to get a sense of who is in the room. We have a couple of questions in the polls. Would love to find out how you interact with op-eds, whether you write them, pitch them, place them, read them. Would also love to find out how you feel about op-eds. Are you team op-ed? Are you very anti-op-ed? Is it just one of many tools that you use? And does it greatly depend? And also would like to hear from you in terms of who's had trouble placing an op-ed in the past year. All of us on this panel work in media and do media pitching on a pretty much, a daily, weekly basis. And it's tough out there. I personally have seen and have anecdotally heard from many, many folks who are in the comms world that pitching and op-ed placing has gotten much, much harder. Not only just in the past, 4 years, I feel like it started about 4 years ago, but in the past year specifically, it's gotten even harder. I don't know if you all remember earlier in the pandemic, folks, I was getting those autoresponders that were like from editorial staff saying, we're getting a record number of op-ed submissions. We may not respond to you at all. And that was something new. So I'm going to end the poll and we can, I don't know, hopefully you all can see the results popping up in a second. So it looks like several of you write op-eds. Many people pitch them and place them. Looks like a lot of people, this is one tool among many. Not that many are in the I hate op-ed train, which is good. But it looks like the overwhelming majority, 76% of you have had a hard time placing op-eds in the past year. And that's why we're doing this training at all. So thank you for being here. Again, please share in the chat if you can, so we know who's in the room. All right, a little bit about us. For those of you who aren't familiar, Climate Nexus tells the stories of people who are impacted by climate change and those driving the energy transition. So we function like a pro bono comms agency whose main client is the climate movement. We do that by working with the media, nonprofits, community organizations, business leaders, and policymakers. Uh-oh. And the Water Hub specifically is a project of Climate Nexus. We launched in January of this year, so we've been around officially for about a year, and we're focused on water issues in the Western United States. We're particularly focused on uplifting the voices, concerns, and solutions of frontline communities and people who are impacted by justice issues, which, as you probably know, are predominantly tribes and communities of color. So I'd love our panelists to take a moment to introduce themselves, and then we will jump right in.
All right, my name is Markia Thomas. I am a manager of the media relations team. I primarily work with partners and clients in the science, environmental justice, and the Caribbean space.
Hi, I'm Shravijan Conti, she, her. I'm also part of the media team. I work across different teams within Climate Nexus, but my focus this year was international climate policy, climate finance, and equity work.
Hi, my name is Sarah Bucci. I am the Strategic Communications Director with the Water Hub, and I am the sole Denver office employee with Climate Nexus.
And I'm Kimiko Martinez. I am the Director of Media Strategy at the Water Hub, was a journalist for the better part of a decade before getting into nonprofit communications about a decade ago. All right, so for the 76% of you who said that it was harder to place an op-ed this year, yeah, it's not just you. We've all been seeing it, and it is definitely rough out there. Yeah, I mostly just to say it's not just you. Things have completely shifted. The pandemic, of course, has hit multiple sectors in lots of different ways, and the media and communications have also been impacted as well. Newsrooms have been hit really hard. We did this briefing earlier this summer, and these stats are old, but even just yesterday, I saw that Real News had laid off a bunch of staff. So the layoffs are continuing. Furloughs, I think many people are back from furloughs, but staff reductions, we're still dealing with staff reductions, still dealing with some people who are in furloughs. And this is an ongoing trend. It's been happening the last 15 years where cities have been losing newspapers, newspaper jobs have dropped by half. And that is definitely making it harder, not only to reach journalists, but as we're increasingly just online and they're trying to deal with more pitches, with less staff, also dealing with a pandemic and everything else. It's harder and harder to get through. So I am going to pass it off to Sarah to dig into who our gatekeepers are.
Yeah, so to lay the groundwork for this section, the Water Hub just released a new scan of op-eds, and we did this mini analysis of 4 key Western outlets to identify trends. And while and we'll share this link as part of our follow-up when we send out like the recording and slides, everything as well. I think some of the details around the water of it will be probably most interesting to the water folks on the call, but for everybody, there were definitely some findings that I think we can extrapolate that are really relevant to this discussion. So for example, we found that local and digital outlets were just more prolific. They just published more op-eds overall, and in the water space tended to publish more op-eds from NGOs, and in the case of smaller local outlets, community voices, so folks who were contributing their commentary based on their lived experience rather than or in addition to their professional affiliation. We also found that the larger national outlets tended to publish their own columnists or syndicated columns, leaving less room for local submissions. And in this particular scan, we looked deeply at the LA Times and found that most of the water op-eds that they published in the last 2 years were from academics with published books. So a very specific kind of definition of what expertise is for those pages, and that the other half was a mix, but made up a lot from their own columnists as well. And we found they published about 1 water op-ed on average a month. So there's definitely steep competition. These are, and I see, yes, sorry, I was just looking at the chat. There are, I think these are really good benchmarks to understand, just to, one, be able to appropriately target the right outlet based on your campaign goals, and also just like setting appropriate expectations for ourselves and what we can do. And this leads into the next slide with Markia.
All right, jumping in here, also for context, I'm also a former journalist. I've worked in a few newsrooms throughout the South and the Midwest before coming to Climate Nexus. And one of the things that really stood out to me were the gatekeepers in media. Because although we claim to be unbiased as journalists covering news and we want to be fair, that's not always the case, depending on like if our editors find what we want to cover to be newsworthy. So only reporting facts and issues that impact the audiences is the goal of most journalists, but it does not always stick or land. All right, so the gatekeepers in media are the general managers, the news directors, and the editors and they all decide what's newsworthy. On like the closest you can get to, like the lower level, you have editors, but like the general managers can shape and form how the newsroom covers certain things and what they exactly cover. So when considering gatekeepers for your op-ed, there are two things you should ask yourself. Who's your target audience? And also, what is the ethnic makeup of the editors of this publication? Two very important things to consider when you're looking to draft and also land an op-ed. So for example, everyone loves the New York Times, and the idea of your op-ed landing in a top tier outlet is exciting, but like many top tier outlets, the editorial staff isn't very diverse. So your job when pitching like an outlet like the New York Times or the LA Times, your job is to convince white educated men who likely do not relate to people within the climate movement, people within the water movement, and what exactly we're advocating for, why your opinion and your subject matters. And this is why it's also important to consider the audience. The readers of these top tier publications may also not align with your target audience. The readers also tend to be white and male, a group that is least likely to be moved. They are kind of like immovable no matter what side they stand on. So you have to really consider how much work are you willing to spend on this single piece, or maybe a top tier outlet might be better for like a longer term strategy, but not exactly op-ed placements. And I will pass it over to Shravya.
Thanks, Markia. So reading the poll, it's clear that most of us are very familiar with this feeling. It's usually a sick feeling. You can feel it in your stomach. And it's a realization that an op-ed is bubbling inside of us, or a colleague who's thinking of an op-ed. So here's the thing. Do not give in. Do not instantly say yes. Instead, take a step back and ask, what's the strategy here? What are the goals? Because we all understand this, right? Getting an op-ed published in a newspaper isn't the end goal. It's just one of the ways to achieve your mission. And so do that process. Be honest with yourself about the goals and ask a few questions such as, what are you trying to accomplish? Is the op-ed in support of a legislation? Is it for raising awareness and getting signatures on a cause perhaps, or countering misinformation on an issue? Basically, what is your cause? What is your call to action? And can you summarize that in one line without acronyms? Then think through who's your audience. Is it policymakers, local community members? Maybe you want to call out certain awful corporations. And if your answer is general public, then please deduct 50 points from your plan, because that's not an audience, that's a cop-out. And then also consider, where does your target audience live and where are they getting the information? Because for example, if your audience are mainly like grassroots leaders or local elected officials, then is a national op-ed really the best path forward? And then conversely, if your goal is to reach maybe funders or climate activists, then are they likely to read an op-ed in a very hyper-local op-ed? And also in this age of social media, consider the fact that social media and distrust of press, are your audiences really relying on news outlets for information? That can be an important consideration. And if you find yourself being unclear on any of these questions, then an op-ed is probably not the best path. And either way, ask yourself again, like, why an op-ed, right? Because consider the following, like Markia was saying, you're at the mercy of gatekeepers and editors, which means that your word limit is around like 700 words. And then you're also inevitably writing for the editor instead of your main audience. And this means that it's all text, it's kind of formal, even if it has to be evocative, and it follows a fairly strict format. That's a lot of work for a lot of people. And then you could be doing all of this work and still getting rejections. Which leads me to, do you have an unpublished op-ed? Especially this year, it's the worst feeling in this world. We've all been there, a lot of us. The good news is that they don't have to languish. There are a few options. So first, I think you should consider whether you really have exhausted all your options. Perhaps there are online news outlets or maybe trade press that align with your goals and audiences, or even ethnic media, which is often ignored despite being such an important medium. And of course, it does depend on who your target audience is, and an op-ed may be built for a white audience, just cannot be copy-pasted and pitched to an ethnic media, but it is definitely worth considering. Ultimately, the point isn't to like check a box and earn a placement, but to figure out options where an op-ed would thrive. And perhaps that might mean repurposing it for other formats. That could hopefully require minimal work. And some of the options could be blogs. So maybe your organization has a blog. We have something known as I Had Climate Voices. I tried the picture. I don't know how readable it is, but those are two pieces that recently got published. And the goal is to find unloved op-eds a home. So let us know if you have any op-eds. We can talk about that. Otherwise, you can consider LTEs and edboard memos. LTEs are typically 100, 150 words, usually in response to a news article, whereas an edboard memo can be bigger. And the goal of that is to reach editorial page editors to influence them for their editorials, even if they cannot publish their op-ed. And that can be a good relationship building exercise, because it can be that if they're exploring that policy, if they're trying to figure out their stance, they might get, invite a few experts to kind of come for a background briefing to understand what the issue is, to get a little bit more information. And it could lead to an op-ed down the lane. Then you could also opt to self-publish on Medium. We've all seen a lot of like op-eds on Medium that go viral. You see them all over social media. So it's definitely a bit of an underutilized tactic, as is LinkedIn. I find it great because it has like a built-in audience, especially with professional and institution level audiences. You could opt to share with the public community or just restrict it within your own network. And finally, if you do have a decent social media following or in the process of developing one, you could also use the content of your op-ed to make them tweet threads. Nothing too long. We cannot have like 50 long tweet threads, but getting your salient points in is a good way. An important caveat for all of this is definitely that these tactics don't have to be either or, right? Like time permitting, you could do all of them with the same piece of content to maximize your reach. And what is also important is having a promotion plan. So for op-eds, I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm sorry, is the screen shared? I can't figure out.
My screen crashed, so it'll be back up in a second. I'm sorry.
Okay. I can continue. So yeah, like, so even for op-eds or whatever we do, having a promotion plan is really important, because sure, you can like get published in a major news outlet, which has an inherent readership that is great. However, I've seen a lot of op-eds just slip by unnoticed because they were not promoted well. So think of having a social media strategy, how to share with partners, doing Hill outreach if that's in your scope, and then even using the links to reach out to radio or other journalists, just be like, hey, here's an expert, or here's something I wrote about, like you might be interested in this, to snag an interview with them down the lane. And all of this goes towards generating buzz, making sure it reaches your key audiences and helps build personal organization brand that is essential in engaging people. So that was a lot. With that, do you have any questions? You can stop for a few questions.
We have some in the chat, so if folks want to put any more, we're going to take a break right now before we dive into some of the other alternatives. So Laura asked if you could talk about the ethnic media a bit. She says specific media are very different. In my community of Boston, Spanish, Brazilian, Chinese are the biggest. Spanish and Brazilian publish a lot of home country info and a little bit of local community. Could you talk about that a little more?
Oh, here you go.
We're back.
Yes.
I don't know, Shravya, if you want to start, or Markia, or we can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, Markia, would you like to take that first? And then I can jump in.
Sure. So I think the key to really like connecting with ethnic publications, which are like trade publications. I'm trying to think of like a good example of one, like Blavity is a really good one for Black people. And they were one of the outlets that actually covered how Atlantic hurricanes impacted islands outside of like the US. And so they're a little, not necessarily easier to get into, but once you really build that relationship and show that you have like very solid content that is inclusive and equitable, they're more likely to work with you outside of other publications. And they actually appreciate if you do have pieces that address or acknowledge parts of the world that's often like, and people that are often forgotten about. So like sometimes the challenge might be, let's say you have a piece on Indigenous Americans, but your community is not really interested on what happens to Indigenous people. Getting that published in a trade publication and then also circulating that around like your local media helps draw attention to that as well, because sometimes they just don't have the context or the knowledge at all to really be able to understand the pieces you're trying to publish. So like as far as local outlets, it just takes a little bit more more of relationship building, but you can totally just like search for key terms online to find like different publications and like what they talk about and how they connect to ethnic groups.
Great. We have a hand up, so I'm gonna unmute Clark so you can ask your question.
Operator error, my apologies.
We can hear you, you're good.
Yeah, no,
Can hear you now.
operator error. I'm gonna put my hand back down.
Okay, no
Got it.
problem. I've taken that back. So we do, we have one other question too about Medium, like, is it taken seriously? Which I think is a great question. And I think, Shravya, I don't know if you want to take this, or I'm happy to start.
Why don't you start and then I'll add?
Yeah, which I think in some ways, like a link is a link. That's the world that we live in these days. And so it can be, I think, a really great tool. I think Medium also has a lot of options if you wanted to build out like a more branded space for you or your organization. And so I think in some ways it is there. I think it's more a tool for you to then have something to promote to get your message out there rather than having like a built-in audience. Yeah, I think I mean, honestly think it's really great, and we use it at Climate Nexus. So do you want to add?
Yeah. So the main importance is that it's a link and Medium looks professional. So it's great to be able to share it over social media. And if you basically have, I think the biggest thing is if you have an op-ed that you don't want to do more of, but you just want a link to share around, you don't want to repurpose it, it's great for that. And you can customize a lot with the fonts and stuff, so you can make your Medium link look as professional, as appealing as possible.
I just want to on the Medium question. There were people that we pitched who had like Medium blogs for the Lancet report, and it was great, and it wasn't leaked, and the coverage actually was really, really good. So Medium is great. The only downside of Medium is that you cannot generate revenue through Medium. So when considering publishing sites, that's something to keep in mind. And they own all of your content as well.
Yeah, someone, Rebecca asks, would you advise using Medium or over your own blog, or using your own blog as well?
I think my advice would be choose one. Either it has to be a blog or Medium. Don't diversify into too many.
Yeah, if you have an existing blog on your website, again, I think it's a link is a link in a lot of ways. So that's a great source. But some folks don't have blogs on their website, so it's a good tool outside of that. We have one more question in the Q&A asking about what our pitch emails look like. Do we offer interviews, reporter fact sheets in addition to op-eds? What do you find most successful?
I'm guessing the question is to reporters when you're pitching an op-ed. In that case, it usually is a little bit of information. If you're the author yourself, giving a bit of like, here's what I'm thinking about, here's what I've written, this is my expertise, maybe linking to your social media or YouTube, whatever you have as a way to promote yourself. Ending with my op-ed is pasted below. Let me know if this is something that works for you, and offering an interview for sure.
Great. Yeah, there was another question in the chat from Adrian, and I think these both lead really well into our next session, which was, can you talk about strategies that you can use to leverage an op-ed into further media coverage, which is definitely something we're going to talk about. All right, so we'll move. Should we keep going with questions, or we can move on and come back to them?
Yeah, let's move on and then we'll come back, because some of these things I think will be covered in the next section, and some are still going to be relevant, I think, when we wrap up the next section as well.
Great. I think I'm up next. So yeah, next we're going to dig into, Shravya talked a lot about, okay, you've written the op-ed and here are some things to think about as you're trying to get one published, or if you have an orphan op-ed that you're trying to find a nice home for, here are some ways you can repurpose it. And this next session, we're going to dive into just some of the like totally different alternatives. And one thing I'll just note, when we talk a lot about like thought leadership and what that means, all of these are just different tactics that we can use to raise the profile of our issues, but also of our organizations and ourselves, our experts, our allies, and they're all mutually beneficial. So most often we're doing a lot of these different tactics all at once. And the more that you're seen as the go-to subject on something, the more likely you are to get your op-eds published. So it is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy and cycle in a lot of ways. And that can be really helpful, because the more that you're the expert and you're out there and you're getting your commentary out there shaping public opinion, the more change you're going to make on the issues you're working on. So that's just want to keep that context in our heads. So the rest of the presentation is about 10% Schitt's Creek gifts. So I hope that everyone is fans, as I am. And I wanted to just open it up, either raise your hand or put in the chat, like, what are other tactics folks have done as alternatives to op-eds, either past experience or ideas you have. Anything? Twitter chats. Yeah, Facebook Live, that's something we're going to talk about, a webinar. I see a couple webinars on here, newsletter features, ed boards. Yeah. So on our next slide, there's just this is a big old list of ideas and alternatives. We're not going to go through each and every one of these things. I'm actually going to dig into 2 of these in the next session, but the main idea I wanted to get across is just that there are a lot of different creative ideas for getting your message out there. There's benefits and challenges to each one. We already mentioned one of the benefits of earned media and op-eds is that built-in audience and readership from a news organization, the external validation that comes from that. And some of this owned content can take a little bit more elbow grease, but and you really need a promotion plan to make it worthwhile. But on the plus side, you control everything about the message. You control the end result. You can help, you can really make sure that the people you're trying to reach are the ones who are seeing it. So the two alternatives that we're going to dig into are pitching outside the box and just some alternative ideas around earned media, and then a quick and dirty on video, which obviously we could do like a whole training on video. So this is a really just an opportunity to spark ideas and go over some best practices and then have time for discussion. So pitching outside the box, all of the elements of a good op-ed, a really timely news hook, a compelling argument, call to action, those are also all the elements of a great interview. And so especially when I think about op-eds as kind of a little bit of a longer form thing, it's a great version of like a longer form, more relaxed conversation, which is what we all love about podcasts, right? And so I often think about how can we repackage this this argument into prepping the expert or the author to be be the interview subject, whether it's for a radio program or a podcast. One of the other benefits of podcasts is they often aren't as tied to the news cycle. So pitching to podcast and radio producers that either are going really deep on an issue. This can be really good if you're trying to reach other wonks and get their attention on a particular, piece of the pie of the issue that you work on. Or there's also great programs that are more focused on like a region, geography, or a little kind of more broad. And so those are great opportunities as well. I think that podcast space is something that can be overlooked because it's harder as communications professionals for us to like really measure the impact of some of that. But it's certainly like, I think has arrived on the scene, not a burgeoning part of the industry so much anymore. I think radio also can get overlooked. I'm often, hunting for that perfect 3-minute NPR spot, but there are a lot of great panel style interview shows on local and regional radio, including non-news stations that host like community spotlights. So if you're trying to reach folks in a particular region on an issue or demographic for a particular news station, radio station, look at some of these non-news outlets that are out there, really popular stations that have DJs, that have shows that bring local community members on, that bring nonprofits on. It can be a really great outlet that is a little outside of the sort of traditional earned media that we think about. And then in our op-ed analysis, as I mentioned, we found larger papers tend to rely on their in-house op-ed capacity through columnists. So why not pitch the columnist on writing about your topic? The same is true for other bloggers. And then in hyper-local news, unfortunately, a lot of community newspapers, local blogs, which are really targeted and the folks who are reading of them, they're strapped these days. But that could mean that there's more opportunity to provide contributed content as well. And one of the points that got made earlier was like, all right, so you've got an op-ed published that Shravya talked about, like, don't let it just like sit out there, like have a promotion plan for that. I think of all of these alternatives as also like your op-ed, if you get an op-ed published, like do all of these things too, because your op-ed is like a mini book. So you take your expert and go on a mini book tour and go make the rounds for pitching radio and TV interviews and get as much mileage out of that as possible for reusing and repurposing it. I want to make a short aside on broadcast. It's not something we're really going deep in on this training, but WaterHub and Climate Nexus actually did a training earlier this summer specifically on TV news. So you can find that on the WaterHub website. And that's a place we've just found a lot of opportunity and is often a better way to reach people than through the newspaper. All right, so that's the pitching outside the box section. If you heard all those ideas and they are not for you and you are not interested, do not worry. I have one more section before we get to our wrap up and Q&A. So the next we're going to talk about is video. Here we have Moira, who is taking advantage of two tactics that I would like to talk about on the scene videos and live streaming. I love Moira. I like everything about her vibe right here. And I do think that's my last GIF of the presentation. So I hope that you enjoyed them. So on the scene videos, text over footage videos, and live streaming are the three types of things that I want to talk about. Self-producing videos can feel really intimidating depending on like the resources that you have either in-house at your organization or partners. But I have seen a lot more groups doing video this summer, especially as in-person events have been put on hold due to the pandemic. And I think it is great. It does not have to be scary. Obviously you can do something that's a little slicker, super well produced, but authenticity is like such a valued quality these days that I do not want people to feel like shy about embracing the smartphones that are kind of laying around. And there are a couple of best practices and tips that I would recommend to make the most of these types of videos. So if you want to go to the next one, I think of on the scene videos, like instead of writing an op-ed, so an op-ed's like what, 600 to 800 words, the average person speaks 125 to 150 words per minute. And the best videos are 2 minutes or less. So like distill your main points down to 250, 300 words and have an author deliver that message on camera with a backdrop that really represents and illustrates the point you're trying to make, whether it's about a particular place or a type of issue. And that is a great way to like really bring a visual element to your message that's super engaging. If you're going to invest in tools and technology to make your videos great, I actually would recommend skipping trying to get a super fancy camera as the first go-to and actually invest in a couple of more accessible options like a microphone and a tripod, because I think the things that take away the most from videos that we're doing, and if we're doing them on their phone or if we're doing them on the scene, is like shaky cam and not being able to hear the audio correctly. And there's a number of like really affordable lavalier mics, like the kind that you clip onto your collar, that can give you a really crisp sound quality that will just like elevate your production level to the next level. And so that's also something we're happy to talk about if you're interested in digging into what some of those tools are. My other hot tips are paying attention to the light, going out. If you're doing something in a COVID safe way, you know, you can go outdoors and shoot and either wear a mask or make sure you're far enough apart to be able to shoot, and going during the golden hours. So kind of earlier in the morning or later in the evening as the sun's kind of coming up or setting and the light isn't quite so harsh and direct on people. It gives you a really nice natural light. It doesn't take a lot of equipment to have to do something in a studio and make it look good. Again, reusing, repurposing. So, you know, like every good op-ed that ends with a call to action, every video should end with a call to action as well, whether it's sign this petition or, you know, call your representative, go to our website, make a donation. Those are all things you still want to include. And then reusing and repurposing the content. So, you know, you can, in addition to sharing with partners and using in your newsletters and posting on your website, you can use these links to these videos in your pitches. you know, on particularly for broadcast, you know, a TV station isn't going to like run footage that you shot necessarily, but there are multimedia and digital editors at TV stations' websites. This is a hot tip from Markia that I'm stealing from her for this part of the presentation, where find out who the web editor, find out who the digital editor for a local station is, because they'll often use video like that. And so pitch them your story, pitch them your video, and you could get something where, while it might not be on the evening news, will be on the web. The next, and I know this is a very like talk heavy part of the presentation, and I'm almost done. So the next one is text or voiceover over footage. So this is an example of a video the Water Hub just produced with the Water Now Alliance. I thought I saw some folks from them on the list, so they may be on the call today. Telling the story of local water infrastructure. And we used a voiceover in this video, but you could just as easily do a text approach, and that way it's a little easier. You don't even have to sync the sound, where you just have a running you know, slideshow of photos or videos with music or natural sound, and your message and text that kind of runs throughout. I think these are really successful on social media because so often people are scrolling when they should be doing something else. And so with having the text over video, it allows people to still read and engage with what you're doing without having the sound on. Excuse me. I'll note for the one we produced with Water Now Alliance, another added wrinkle was we had to get all the permissions for all the footage and the photos that we use. So if you already own a lot of things and are just repurposing it, it can make it a lot easier. An example of this, before I was at Water Hub, I worked with a group called Grid Alternatives, and last year our most watched video, and I'm talking like 25,000 views, and we normally got like a few hundred, was we had some drone footage lying around from a project. And so we slapped some music on it, put some text on it, and it was literally our most successful video of the entire year. And it turns out people love drone footage. Excuse me, my throat is getting dry now from talking. And so there are definitely a lot of good resources for sourcing drone footage if you don't have it already. And for the water folks, groups like Lighthawk, which can help gather drone footage at no cost to you, is a great resource. But there's something about it that people just love, the like flying through the air, looking over stuff, reading about it, that is really successful. All right, and lastly, I want to talk about live streaming. This was something that came up in this was something that came up in the chat when people had examples of things that they were doing as opposed to op-eds. And I think that this is a great function because you can go live and talk to your own followers, but Instagram also has this great function where you can go live with another account. So it's almost kind of going back to that video, the interview thing that we talked about with longer conversations. So if you have 2 organizational accounts, especially if you're a smaller organization and you want to get connected with like an influencer or a bigger organization that can help drive new followers to your page, prep an interview ahead of time, go live together, get all of your followers. It's a kind of thing that you can also promote as an event, especially as we're not doing in-person events. And that's a great way to still get that content out there to people who are following you on social media. And you can also, when you go live, save those to your stories so you can still point people back to them after the fact. So that is my bit.
Thanks, everyone. So quick roundup. Most of y'all are in comms, so you know this, but let your audience and your goals be your guide. You know, everything, it's audience, audience, audience. As you all know, the media, a placement, whether it's a story with a reporter or whether it's an op-ed, placement is not the end goal. It is just one step in helping to reach whatever goal that you're trying to achieve. So getting really clear about who your audience is critical, and knowing where you should be pitching it all, and not only where you should be pitching, but what kind of pitches you should be doing. Is it really an op-ed? Is this going to be something that's better as a reporter pitch, or is it going to be better as something that's self-published? If you really want to be going deep with something, it's probably not an op-ed, because an op-ed, you need to make a point, prove your point, have a call to action, and be done with it. If you want to go deep, you probably need to do an ed board memo, or you need to go do a Facebook Live or go on a podcast and really dig into some issues. If it's something that's very, very timely, like breaking right now, you probably need to go do a tweet thread. Yeah, you're probably going to be pitching some stuff, or maybe you want to go live on Facebook or Instagram right now as well to say, here's what's happening, here's what our thoughts are, but getting your information out there. And as Sarah mentioned, the more that you're doing this, the more that the people that you're working with are doing this, you're building your own brand, you're building your own thought leadership, so and credibility and visibility in this space, so that the next time that you go to pitch an op-ed or go to be quoted or get your people to be quoted, it feeds both ways. They have something to look at to say, oh, okay, I see that there's a track record of so-and-so saying X, Y, and Z. I can see the types of things that they've been saying. And yes, I want to talk to this person. So I just want to reiterate that it's all part of a bigger strategy. Think across multiple channels. I think I just covered that. And ask for help. That's why we here at Climate Nexus and the Water Hub, that's why we exist. We do pro bono work for those who are in the climate movement, those who are in the water movement, and we will likely continue to be doing trainings. I think that we will very likely be doing a deeper dive on video, because we've been hearing a lot about that in the last month or two, specifically about tips and tricks, getting more comfortable doing video, getting more comfortable doing live streaming. So that's very likely what's next. And I saw your comment, Laura, about the tips and tricks. We actually do have a tip sheet on the Water Hub page. I will either send it out with the email roundup, or if I can find the link now, I will send it around. So this is the part where we go back to Q&A. Sarah, if you can moderate those, and I will look for this link to see if I can find the TV tip sheet.
Yes. One question we had in the Q&A was, can nonprofits monetize a blog space? And if yes, what can that look like? And to be honest, I don't know the answer. So I'm going to see if anyone else on the call does. That might be something we need to look into, but I don't know. The next one.
You actually can monetize in the blog space. It would mostly depend on who is trying to advertise with you on your space. Does it align with your values? And then also is this advertisement a tax write-off for that organization? If the answer is yes, then they can work with you, not to necessarily have monetized posts, but to be able to put their ads on your post itself.
Marquise, you're saying it's more about the sponsorship kind of space than it is around the pay-per-click kind of stuff.
Right. It would be more like a sponsor space, like how newsrooms do it, digitally online. You'll go to a page and you'll just see a bunch of ads, randomly based on what your phone listens to, or things that you like. It would be similar to that.
Great.
Oh, and also nonprofits are also monetizing their content through social media, like Instagram and TikTok, as well as their blog posts.
Cool. It sounds like that's a whole other subject I could dig into. Here's a good question. Other than looking individually, do we know of any good resources for just finding out who are the right op-ed contacts at a news outlet?
Honestly, the best thing is to go to the masthead or try to figure out through Twitter who the best person is. But you could also invest in databases such as Meltwater or Cision. Those tend to be a little pricey, but if you pitch very often, then they really pay for themselves. And I'll put the names in the chat so you know the names.
I'll also add that there's plenty of times that even though I have the right op-ed editor, I'll still get an autoresponder that says, thanks for your email, please email op-ed@latimes.com. I'm not going to read, like, more or less like, nice try, please send it to the general email anyway. So, you know, it depends on your relationship with that editor as well.
One thing I like to do is like email the fellows who are working on editorial teams, because they'll often know also other op-ed editors at different outlets and publications. And the last time I did that, I think I got a list of like 15 different op-ed editors. So that was quite helpful.
Yeah, I'll just plug, we're gonna end with our contact information. If you're trying to track something down, you know, just reach out to us too, because we are happy to help if we know who the right people to go to are, what we know about them. But I know on the like list part of this, M&R has a pretty good, I'll try and find the link for it. They're a media or a consultant organization, has a pretty good list too. And I see Nicole has just put one in the chat from the Radical Communicators Network. So there are a couple of things out there, but I have never seen anything like that was insanely comprehensive. So it is kind of just looking ad hoc. All right. Our next question is from Michael. Once you have your op-ed published, self or in news publication, what are key steps to continued impressions and engagement that extend its shelf life?
Sure, I can start on that. I think the first thing is on that is, even as you're writing the op-ed, try to write it in a way that it's not just impinging on like one moment or one news thing. Try to write in a way that it's relevant even 6 months or a year in advance. That's advice number one. After that, once it is published, all the other things that we mentioned that you could do, those are ways to keep it in circulation. So maybe a week after or something, you could do a tweet thread of sorts. Or if a relevant news breaks, you can say, hey, this is important. I had written about this in this paper or whatever, when and where. If you're thinking of doing a video, that's a great way to like talk about the issue. And at the end, you could say something like, by the way, I've written this X issue. If a news moment presents itself, you could reach out to a reporter expressing your opinion and then saying, I've written about this. So that also gives a bit of validation. Those are some steps. Any other opinions?
I would say that that's important, but also, I sort of like your newsletter, coming back, continuing to post it on Twitter. Just because you posted it once doesn't mean you can't post it 5 more times, depending on the timeliness of that thing. Or posting it on your LinkedIn. I know a lot of people who post op-eds on LinkedIn, and that extends the shelf life. And it doesn't happen, it usually happens right when it runs, but again, depending on the timeliness of the topic, these are, like Sarah said earlier, a link is a link. So whether you published it on Medium or whether it was something that ran in a particular outlet, you can continue to promote those things over a whole long range of time. And it's particularly helpful to bring those things back in and back up at decision points. You might have had an op-ed that ran around an earlier decision point that is relevant again 6 months later. Those points, like it was about an earlier decision point, but everything else in there is still completely relevant. Bring it back up and make it part of your campaign plan for right now, for this new news moment, for this new decision point, for this new call to action. Yeah,
one thing WaterHub did a training a few month ago. Time moves in strange ways in 2020, but on digital organizing 101. And one of the things that our co-presenter with the Community Water Center mentioned that he does as a way for him, this tactic comes up for just like creating more content out of stuff that already exists, because it's, as a comm shop of one, it's always hard to like come up with enough stuff to post on social media. And so he would take either, if it was, I think the example was from a news article, but I think it'd be really relevant for an op-ed, but basically made a very simple graphic in Canva with like quotes from the piece and a headshot or action shot of the author, and used those as a thing to post on social media and keep going, keep the interest in the piece going. So I think that's another good idea.
1 second. We're going to continue with the Q&A because there are several more, but we are also coming. I did promise that I would let people know we're at the hour. So if you have to hop, please feel free to hop off. We're going to continue with the Q&A, but thank you to everyone who's been here. Our contact information is here. We did record. I will be putting this into a blog roundup and putting this with a couple of resources into that email follow-up in the next couple of days. So again, if you need to hop, feel free. And if you want to stay on, we're definitely going to continue with the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. I know there's some new comments. I just scrolled back up to see if there was anything interesting previously. And Jessica noted that she really liked this platform, believe.tv, because you can brand video and simultaneously live stream across multiple channels, and it is fairly inexpensive. And I think that's a great thing to flag. Something that I've also used is StreamYard, which I know is, I think was created so people could live stream video games. All of the cool technology was created so people could live stream video games, I think. But that's another one where it has a very good look. You can brand the whole thing and you can have speakers kind of pop up and you can shoot it out across all the different social channels if you're going live and also on YouTube. And that's also a very affordable option, although I think they increased the price slightly when COVID hit and everyone started using it. I think it's still just, $30 a month or something like that. So just wanted to flag those. Yes, thank you gamers for sure. All right. Here's a question from Sarah. Is it a good strategy to delineate between staff op-ed versus organizational op-eds? I'm not sure I totally understand your question. So Sarah, I don't know if you feel comfortable or still on and want to raise your hand. We could actually just bring you on to talk. Oh, here we go. All right, Sarah, you're on.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm on the phone, so I'm never sure. So yeah, my question is about if you have like a staff author who wants to write maybe a more pointed op-ed versus like what you would normally do like in your organizational voice, like what is the right strategy to approach that, I guess is what I'm asking. Like, should they publish it like on their own, like they make their own thing on Medium and then you promote it? Should the organization promote it on their platform like a blog, or put it out, try to pitch it to media under their name? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I'm
Okay.
curious, I have a follow-up question to that. So is it
Sure.
just like more like, is it a matter of tone being spicier or more fiery?
Yeah.
Or is it,
Yes,
or is
basically.
it like they might be off of our organizational messaging points? Because those are definitely two different ends of the spectrum in terms of how you might handle it.
More the former. I mean, so for a little bit of context, I'm in a, environment and climate focused organization, but we're in the Southeast. And so a lot of our audience is not necessarily on the same page with us in terms of policies. And we want to like kind of toe the line from an organizational tone, but our staff, like I want to give them the opportunity to kind of push those boundaries a little bit in their own writing. So I'm just trying to figure out the best strategy to give them that platform and like how and where we do that versus how and where we speak as an organization more formally and a little more less spicy, I guess, a little more blandly about it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I have seen some of that before too. And I have generally pushed those more towards if they happen to already have like a Medium account. Although I will
Right, okay.
also say there's something to be said for having a diversity of voices in a range of voices, that, you know, these two people are definitely on the spicier end. They're still within the organ, like they're just like right there at the end caps of like what our organizational tone can, they're right there. They're, you know, they're right there,
Yeah.
straddling that edge. Versus, you know, the bulk of people are like solidly in the middle. But you know, that's the more fiery, the more compelling. So and obviously we're working with advocates and people who are very passionate. So my personal opinion is to either make space for that sort of wider, just having more of a spectrum of voices and being like, okay, these folks over here, I mean, our CEO and our ED or whoever, they're always like right here, but we have a couple who are more this way.
On the fringe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you
Okay.
know, tell them, you know, put that on your own LinkedIn, put it on your own Medium, or put it on your own Twitter. I mean, I think Twitter is much more of a safe space of like, people are going to be much more reactive and authentic there than on the longer form things.
Sure.
I'm sure do either any of you also have thoughts on that? Because that's my personal experience with it.
I think that's a very tough one. I would like to suggest that as much as it's possible, having validation and branding within organizational, either blogs or something, is better. But in those circumstances, when it's just not possible, at least promoting them through social media or other mediums.
Yeah, that's what we've done. It's sort of how we set it up in the moment, where you publish it yourself either on LinkedIn or Medium or however you want to do that if you have your own blog site, and then we would promote it and say, hey, look at this great thing our staff person wrote, but it wouldn't be on our like official channel per se.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. Some folks have added in the chat that I'll share and opine on briefly is like in the byline. So, you know, folks have noted that they've helped get something published, but said explicitly like the author isn't representing, they're speaking as themselves and not representing the views of X. Or in the byline, I think you can also just, so often we say, you know, Sarah is the communications person with WaterHub, and that's the byline, but that bylines of op-eds are a great place to expand on what is the definition of expertise, and that can make it a little harder to get them published sometimes because there is this like emphasis on traditional expertise. But at the same time, you know, you can have a byline that's like, I've worked in this field for 15 years and I've done XYZ, that doesn't necessarily talk about the organizational affiliation, and that could be another way. If you're trying to toe that line.
Great, thank you.
But yeah, I've been working to be more comfortable with fire personally. Yeah. So
same.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to here, I take Sarah off, and then another question.
Sorry, before that, Jessica had also mentioned that they sometimes add, this author does not represent the views of X. Yeah.
Which is a good tip, although I have also seen that and also people ignore it. Like, I mean, once if you work for an organization, whether you write something as part of that organization or not, people can trace it back. That's, you know, the good and the bad of the digital age is, you know, you may not represent the views of the company or organization you're working for, but it's going to be mixed or conflated somehow, kind of no matter what.
We have a question from Elizabeth about what we think about the press folks, which I'm going to assume means like communication staff being the ones on video talking rather than necessarily the staff experts, because they aren't always the most comfortable in front of a camera.
I'm a both and. I'm a like, yes, it's fine for press folks to do it, especially if you're keeping it to top line talking points and you're comfortable doing that. But the thing about video and live streaming is everyone thinks that they need more media training. They could have gone on 100 media trainings, and a lot of the people that we work with, scientists, lawyers, advocates, experts, etc., they just they want to learn, because I mean, a lot of these people are academics by background, and they feel like it's something that they can know in their heads, and it's not. You can have all of the tips, and the reality is you need to be in front of the camera and you need to practice. And that's just the reality of it. You just have to be in front of the camera and do it. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. So I'm sort of a both, like, yeah, it's totally fine for press folks to do it, and also make the people do it. You got to push through the uncomfortable to get more comfortable.
Yeah, man. And maybe like on, sorry, Sarah, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, there's something really compelling about that like first person person. And I also, I'm again, yes, and like if you're going to do a good job and you know what you need to say, like just because you happen to work in the communications office doesn't mean that you can't also be the representative for the campaign. Fully support that. Oh, not comfortable means not interested. LOL. Yes, I fully get that. But there is something really compelling about hearing from people who can talk about the work that they're doing on the ground, especially if folks are working in community or, and so, yeah, it does take a little bit of coaching, and really the coaching is just to build people's confidence and comfort rather than to give them any kind of new skill or tip. Let's see. Oh, sorry, was someone else gonna jump in on that?
No, that's it. I mean, I was going to say from the perspective of someone is not comfortable but interested, then starting with like super low stakes videos, because I'm someone who hates videos, but just doing something that's super low stake and then building the confidence also helps. So if there's a huge video and that person is just not going to be comfortable, that's fine. Maybe just get them a 1 minute segment, not one, a 5-second segment or something like that, and build up the confidence.
Or something that they can read on Zoom. Like you can have a piece of paper right here, and the computer's right here, and you can do multiple takes. You know, live streaming, I think, takes more comfort and more practice than a video that you can edit. And I think also knowing that it's low stakes and saying we can edit this, you can review it, don't worry about it, we can do as many takes as you want until you feel comfortable, is also a way of not only getting practice but building that confidence, because then they get to see the multiple takes and see, oh, I liked when I did that, I didn't like when I did that, I liked when I said this way. So it's also sort of a coaching exercise, in addition to like building up that muscle.
It sounds like, and I'm just seeing Michael's comment, this discussion is great. Very excited about the next webinar and embracing video. I've seen a few comments like that. So maybe we'll make sure to build that into our 2021 plan. I'm just going back through the chat. We don't have any other questions yet. So if there's other stuff that we somehow missed in the chat that you want us to talk about, retype it, raise your hand, ask questions. Otherwise, and we'll be hanging out here for a while. So, feel free to hang out with us and keep going or jump off. Anything else?
We got a lot of really good questions and suggestions in the chat as well. So thanks to everyone who's chipped in, who's added their voice thus far. And if we end up wrapping at 12:15 instead of 12:30, so much the better. I mean, we all have busy lives, and we had anticipated this going about an hour and just leaving space, but we definitely don't have to take the whole space. So if you need 15 minutes of your life back before your next meeting to take a break, to breathe, fully support that.
I'll just note, I'm going to save the chat. I did see a few things pop up where someone asked for like a particular resource, or did want to hear more about XYZ thing, or did want to meet with us in the new year. So I am taking note of all of those, so we can all make sure that we do follow up.
Great. I'm not seeing anything new, so I think that we can wrap this up. Our emails are there if you need to reach out to us. And like I said, we will be sending out a wrap-up blog and some additional resources and links in the next couple of days. So thanks for being here. Have a great holiday and Happy New Year.